Well, welcome to the 700 Club. After facing heavy pressure from Congress, Secretary of State John Kerry has finally declared that ISIS is committing genocide against Christians and other religious minorities in Iraq and Syria.
But Kerry's declaration doesn't require the United States to take any action to protect those persecuted believers. Jennifer Wishon brings us the story from Washington.
Pushing it right up to the deadline set by Congress, Secretary of State John Kerry said the words Christians and others waited to hear.
In my judgment, Daesh is responsible for genocide against groups in areas under its control, including Yazidis, Christians, and Shia Muslims.
It's a critical first step towards protecting Christians from ISIS and other Islamic radicals in Iraq and Syria.
Every jihadist in the Middle East believes they can kill, kidnap, enslave, and otherwise torture Christians and other religious minorities, and they believe they can do it without repercussions.
In northern Iraq, Assyrian Christians are an ancient people descended from the first followers of Christ.
We are, as Assyrians of the Middle East, we are on the verge of extinction.
Juliana Tamarazi recently visited the town of Teleskov in the Nivea plains of Iraq, where 200,000 Christians have fled from ISIS.
The homes are destroyed. When you walk inside, their closets are all broken, the beds are all overturned. The kitchens are destroyed.
Secretary Kerry's genocide designation helps keep the plight of these Christians near the front of U.S. foreign policy. Advocates wasted no time celebrating. They're already working with the State Department to make sure Christians are represented in Syrian peace talks and that the property rights of Iraqi Christians forced to flee their homes are enforced.
There are going to be borders redrawn, constitutions redrafted. It's absolutely essential that the Christians have a voice in this process, or they will have no place in the new Syria and in the new Iraq.
There's already an effort to create a safe haven in the Nineveh Plains so that Christians, Yazidis, and other minorities can return home, govern themselves, and rebuild their lives without fear of extermination.
If you care about the presence of Christianity, the Christian witness in this very gospel-poor part of the world, you will support the idea of a safe haven.
In spite of the horrors they've experienced at the hands of ISIS, Christians in this part of the world are experiencing a revival of their faith.
They have told me repeatedly it is because of persecution that has been inflicted on them that they have grown closer to Christ, that they find themselves praying more, that they're thirsty for the gospel more.
Now the same advocates who pushed for the genocide designation are moving to keep up the pressure to ensure the Obama administration not only talks but acts to protect those persecuted Christians and other religious minorities. They hope to make real progress before the next administration moves into the White House. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Well, a safe haven is absolutely needed. We need to support that. It looks like the Kurds are the only place where there can be a safe haven in Iraq, and I hope we can get them the aid they need to protect people within the area under their control. There's a new word that the Secretary Kerry used. He said Daesh. Some pronounce it Daesh, and it's a new name for ISIS, ISIL. We keep renaming this group. The reason it's called Daesh is it sounds like it's an acronym for the Arabic term for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and the Australian Prime Minister started calling it Daesh because Daesh or Daesh sounds like an Arabic insult, and it means the one who causes discord. So we're essentially insulting them by using that term, and that's why world leaders are picking up the term. Secretary Kerry has picked it up, the President of France picked it up, but it all started in Australia this year, and that's the new term for ISIS, so get used to it. In other news, North Korea is defying the world again with another missile test. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. The North ignored UN resolutions, firing a medium-range ballistic missile today. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the missile flew about 500 miles before crashing into the sea. The test violated multiple UN security resolutions that ban the North from engaging in any ballistic missile and nuclear activities. And it came just days after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordered weapons tests tied to building a long-range missile capable of reaching the United States mainland. The regime has threatened to hit the U.S. with preemptive nuclear strikes. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is working for the release of an American citizen arrested in North Korea. The 21-year-old University of Virginia student was sentenced to 15 years hard labor earlier this week for trying to steal a propaganda banner. But as Charlene Aaron reports, he may be set free sooner than expected.
I have made the worst mistake of my life.
The U.S. government is working to free 21-year-old Otto Warmbier, an American student sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. The North Korean government says this video shows Warmbier stealing a political banner from the hotel he was staying at with a tour group on January 2nd. Warmbier's family is enlisting the help of former governor and U.S. ambassador to the UN, Bill Richardson.
He did a college prank, a mistake, but 15 years to be sentenced, that's crazy. Hopefully now after the sentencing, it'll mean negotiations can start on his release on humanitarian grounds.
Please save my life. Please think of my family.
Close to a dozen American tourists have been arrested in North Korea in the last 6 years, often because of Christianity. All but one have been released. Kenneth Bae, a Korean-American missionary, was also sentenced to 15 years of hard labor for what North Korea called crimes against its state. He was released after just over 2 years. The Obama administration is demanding immediate pardon and release of Warmbier. North Korea will likely try to drive for a bargain it wants, and it's likely the American government will be able to negotiate his release within a year or two, based on similar past arrests. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thanks, Charlene. President Obama's visit to Cuba next week comes after recent government crackdowns against political dissidents in the communist country. Human rights advocates want the president to speak out against the abuse and use America's power as leverage. Heather Sells brings us that story.
Since President Obama resumed relations with Cuba in late 2014, government persecution there has only increased. Since November, political arrests have spiked, reaching more than 1,100 arrests a month. And so far, 2016 is on course to be a record-setting year for human rights abuse.
I mean, the fact that there are still people being imprisoned in the Western Hemisphere, 90 miles away from America, simply for what they believe, I think all of this should be of great concern.
Critics charge the president's move has actually encouraged this attack on basic rights. Dr. Jaime Suchliki says Cuban President Raul Castro fears the new openness with the U.S. will embolden his opponents.
He's worried that the Cubans will get activated because of this relationship, and they'll be trying to defy the regime.
Once the crackdown began, we should have pulled back, and we should have said, we're not going to strengthen our relations with you unless you move in the right direction.
Many questions surround the president's historic visit, and they include what will he and what won't he say about human rights, and who will he meet with?
If he gets to meet with dissidents, if he actually speaks out about human rights, he can have a major impact. He can loosen up that society. He can embolden dissidents, and he can put that regime, as it should be, on the defensive.
The fact that our government, and right now where it's in a position of greatest leverage, that the Cuban government wants as much as it wants so much from us, we can and we should be asking for these improvements.
Others, like Suchliki, see the president's ability to drive change as limited.
Obama will tell Raul, look, we need to improve in that area. Raul will say sure, and that's the end of it.
Castro plans to step down in 2018. Suchliki believes the priority of maintaining control and a smooth transition will trump any move to improve human rights. Obama supporters, however, believe a push towards greater communication and economic ties could lead to political independence one day and improved human rights for now. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thanks, Heather. Here in Washington, the federal government has set a record, and not a good one, for failing to find its own records and files. The Obama administration reported the government couldn't find even a single page of some files requested under the Freedom of Information Act. In more than 1 in 6 cases, government searchers said they came up empty-handed, according to an analysis by the Associated Press. The FBI couldn't find any records in nearly 40% of cases, An Environmental Protection Agency regional office that oversees New York and New Jersey couldn't find anything nearly 60% of the time. And U.S. Customs and Border Protection came up empty-handed in 34% of cases. Well, despite facing serious cultural opposition in modern America from anti-religious sentiments and secularism, Christians still view their faith as, quote, a force for good in today's world. That's the finding by the Barna Group for David Kinnaman's new book called Good Faith. The research found that many believe they are misunderstood, persecuted, and marginalized. Barna surveyed the broadest segment of practicing Christians, including evangelicals, Catholics, and mainline churchgoers. And despite the opposition they believe they often face, they say their faith is, quote, a primarily positive contribution to society. Gordon, findings I don't think anyone can dispute.
Well, that's because if you're Christian, you know it works. You know that from your own life how you've changed. And so you want to share that with others so that we can live in a society where we value that we love one another. That's one of the principal things that we do. Let us be known by our love. When we're known by that, we really show off Jesus.